So today we're going to talk about cognitive engagement and voice automation in the contact center. But before I dive into what the heck, all that means, just the one slide pitch about, you now know who I am, but about Exact. So we started in the smart city space and sort of our contact center practice emerged out of that, out of an opportunity that actually we'll talk about here in a bit about Kansas City, Missouri. But in fact, we provide call center AI and services to companies that want to put their data to work to improve customer experiences and also make their contact centers more profitable. So inside of that, there's a number of different things we do to address some of the trends that we see unfolding right now in the call center space. One of those is, politics aside, the economy is doing pretty well, and unemployment is at some all-time lows. And what that means is that hiring and staffing is getting harder. So tightening labor markets make it more expensive to staff a call center, to hire, train, retain. In addition to that, with the gig economy, workers want more flexibility, and they also want a different type of work. A lot of folks that we talk to are tired of sort of rote call center tasks, and what that leads to is, very high attrition rates. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but I've heard that contact center attrition rates fall closely behind that in waste management and trucking. So, beyond sort of staffing what happens inside the call center, the other side of that coin is that customer expectations are changing. Through the advent of, Alexa and Siri and Google voice assistants, mobile applications, digital channels, customers want a different type of experience now than calling in and setting in an IVR menu for a few minutes to finally get to an agent to wait on hold. Additionally, there was a huge proliferation of chatbots over the last few years. Very few of them have actually been good. So it's kind of soured some people on that whole experience. We'll talk a bit about that here in a minute too. Concurrent with that, we see the digital disruptors, so these new companies that could be your competitors, starting digitally native and using new technology that's already in the cloud. They're taking advantage of machine learning, IoT, natural language processing, a lot of these new tools and advancements that make it difficult for you to sort of keep up, with their digital experience. So, again, when we are out talking to call centers, there's on the backside of this trend, companies trying to address that. We find that a lot of them are saddled with legacy infrastructure. Maybe you've got a phone system, voice over IP or TDM that you put in 5-10 years ago. And now you're looking at a forklift upgrade to take advantage of some of these new technologies, or maybe you're evaluating a migration to the cloud, which is awesome. Maybe you've already done that. And almost everyone we talk to is budget constrained. And if you're not budget constrained, then we definitely want to talk to you. Coupled with that, the nature of the work, the nature of the contact center technology is changing in such a way that it requires new skill sets. So, managing machine learning for your speech analytics in the cloud is different than it used to be. There's all these new tools, but how do you sort of, go out and hire a developer and take advantage of, bots to change your contact center? And the reality is that companies are struggling with this. So the focus of today, is taking the notion of, well, how can we take these tools and put something together that's going to do two things. One, drive costs out, of your contact center through automation, as well as enhance and improve the customer experience. The old way of doing this, one of the old ways of doing this was through IVRs, which come with, traditionally a room full of racks and servers that look something like this. And they are expensive. You've got to port the things for peak volume. Trunks are idle when nobody's talking. If you wanted any type of speech recognition in there, you're paying, Nuance a bunch of money or some third-party license to get that in there. And because it was so expensive, you had to take an all-or-nothing approach, right? So if you're going to spend $500,000 or pick a big number, you've got to have a lot of call volume running through that thing and a lot of calls automated to deflect that expense. Also, they're not, unless it's a very simple call type, they're not very good traditionally. And I'm not selling against the stuff we've been positioning for the last 10 years, but it's a little long in the tooth. We did the best we could with the technology at hand. But a lot of these, speech recognition IVRs are what's called directed dialogue. It is, you're directing a person through a menu tree and you're just using voice to do it. And they're not conversational. Traditionally, they don't create a lasting or meaningful customer experience. Coupled with, to build and deploy the things is expensive, right? You've got to integrate it in with your back office business applications to do things like order lookups or change management. It just took a long time. So given all that, got all these great new tools, saddled legacy infrastructure, and you don't know how to use these new tools, where do you start? Well, that's where we brought to market a cognitive IVR. We're calling it our cognitive voice automation platform. Our definition of this is a cognitive IVR has the ability to do two things. One is engage in a natural language-based conversation with a customer. That's important. This is no longer, say or press 1 if you want to talk to a billing agent. This is, how can I help you today? The second piece of this is the automation component. So we can do, cognitive routing, which we'll show use case here in a second. But the real value is when you can integrate with a back office system and do something for the customer, whether it's check an account balance or it's reship something or get them to the right person. So what we're seeing now with cognitive engagement, and we kind of, voice automation falls under this broader umbrella of customer experience and engagement because we do have the ability, or you have the ability, to do this through other digital channels. So you can take advantage of chat, and you can take advantage of text and SMS with a common brain behind it, if you will. And what we'll talk about is on a call-by-call basis or a customer interaction basis, we can take 85% of the cost out of a live agent. So if you look at an average cost per call in a call center between $5 and $7, depending on your industry and your, how you're manning and staffing the thing, to be able to take 85% of that cost out is meaningful. And there's an impact on customer experience, particularly for things like absorbing call spikes and irregular arrival patterns, or maybe somebody's going to have to wait in queue where they can't call in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get to an agent. And the other side of this too, and we'll show a chart here in a minute, but like bots don't need breaks. They don't take days off and they don't quit. So coming back to that high attrition rate that we talked about and the need to continually train people, pulling them off the phones to, managing that process with a bot, you train it once and the thing knows what to do. And you continue to train it, add capabilities, and it can do more things. This is what we're calling a tale of two calls. So on the left-hand side is like the traditional directed dialogue menu-based IVR, right? I told the story the other day. I had to call Dyson vacuum cleaners actually twice within a 7-day period, and I spent 2 minutes in the IVR before it even got me to the agent queue. It was like saying stuff like, if your vacuum's making this noise, press 2, and if it's blinking blue, press 3. Well, none of those things were my issue. So I literally timed it. I spent 2 minutes twice in a week going through this thing on the left, whereas the real opportunity in customer experience would have been, how can I help you today? Well, the battery won't hold the charge. At that point, you have two options. You can get me to the right person using that conversational routing engine, or you can say, tie this into a knowledge base and begin a dialogue with me that says, well, tell me what it's doing. Is the light blinking blue? Or how long does it hold the charge? Oh, well, you know what? Let's reship you a new battery, which was the outcome. That call would have taken 30 seconds and cost Dyson 50 cents instead of spending 5 minutes of my time and costing them $5. So let's talk about then, how this starts to come together. So with cognitive IVR, and what we call the exact way or the exact approach, you can start small and iterate. So gone are the days of having to put in some monolithic thing, spend a bunch of money programming it, We'll share a case study here in a moment with the City of Kansas City where we started with one call type. We're able to use their existing on-premise ACD, peel those call type off, send them to us, and we handled 85% of them on an ongoing basis. The cognitive IVR is able to do that because we can take advantage of the best of breed technology. So all those things we talked about earlier with the cloud and AI and natural language processing and APIs can all sort of be bundled up into one easy button, if you will. And it's conversational and AI powered, which means it gets better over time. Works with what you have. Again, no expensive forklift or upgrade. We can take over the intelligent front door, which is that, how may I help you today? Or do a very targeted and focused transaction type. And the other, I think, sort of unique approach is that doing this as a fully managed service means that Exact and our data scientists, our conversational AI folks, manage all of the complexity for you. So we've got, dashboards, and if you think about the old days, or not old days, current days, you've got somebody like a quality assurance department listening to phone calls of agents and scoring those. We actually do that on our bots so that we're continually improving the customer experience and the efficacy of the platform. And there's really, call it 4 key components to one of these things. The first is the knowledge-based creation. So you're used to doing this today with like a training manual that you sit down in front of an agent and they spend 3 days to 3 weeks in a training class teaching them systems and how to respond to customers or callers. We can do that. We can create an online knowledge base for the bot to interact with. If you've got an FAQ or a knowledge base today, that's a great starting place. You can start handling calls usually within a couple of days. The other piece, and this is really, I think, where a lot of magic and investment happens, is in that natural language processing piece. Things like speech to text, aren't perfect today. And so we've got to be able to model around some of those things. So when somebody, says they're calling their transit agency to see where their bus is at. And they say, I'm going from Charlestown to Kendall and I need to know where my bus is at. That platform needs to know that they're talking about Kendall Square in Cambridge and not Kindle the device from Amazon. Or if you want, somebody says cancel, you've got to know how to handle that. So there's this sort of, Q&A component of it, which I mentioned, which is, where's my bus? You plug in the underlying systems to know where that bus is at. Now, all of a sudden, you can enable more conversations. And then there is the dialogue management component, which is how do you want that dialogue to go? What do you want that customer experience to be like, and how do you craft that? All of these things sort of come together then, coupled with the integration into the back office and CRM applications. So I'm sort of referring to this in tech terms as the API-ification of the contact center. For those who know what an API is, it's basically an interface that a programmer can interface with a system. So back in the day, we had a bunch of green screens in front of our agents that, there was, if you wanted to plug into those with another computer integrated into something, you had to call IBM or Accenture and spend a couple $1 million to do it. Well, now with Salesforce.com, with Zendesk, with, pick an ERP platform and the ability to integrate into those in a more fluid manner. Now with voice automation, this sort of becomes another application setting off of those platforms. And I think sort of one of the groundbreaking things here is that it works with either your existing ACD and phone system, whether that be on-premise or whether it be in the cloud, or you can use our hosted platform in the cloud for voice. Because this takes an ecosystem approach and adaptable, it can work with what you have. Start with where you're at, map out where you want to go, and begin that journey. Another sort of pillar on this is the ability to see what the thing is doing, right? And to have an integrated performance analytics and business intelligence platform. Vince mentioned earlier that, I spent a lot of time in the space, and I had a company that I ended up selling to or being acquired by Cisco Systems. It was a call center reporting package. Became Cisco Unified Intelligence Center. So now we've come back. Unfortunately, Cisco hasn't touched the thing in the last decade, but we've come back and sort of rebuilt a new AI and analytics engine for the contact center that just becomes a part of this platform. So you can see here, like on the far right there, call spikes. And this is how you're able to manage performance, see the visibility on a daily basis. I think, this changes everything inside the contact center, and I think in some amazing ways. As we mentioned, if you compare a live agent to a digital agent across different categories, from like a recruiting standpoint, how much you pay an agent is largely dependent on where you're at, right? It's easier to hire or not easier, but it's generally less expensive to hire a call center agent in Kansas City than it is Chicago. But with a digital agent, technology forces lower the price of your interaction. You can control that. So now instead of saying, how much do I have to pay to handle a customer interaction, you can ask questions like, well, how much am I willing to pay? And how do we optimize around that and optimize around experience? Same thing with training. Agents, it doesn't matter if it's a simple call type or a complex one, there is a high onboarding cost that goes with getting them up to speed as well as ongoing coaching. And you're doing it in blocks of 10 to 20 people at a time. Right? So there is nothing inexpensive about that process. With a bot, there's an initial training component and an integration component, but that's a one-time thing. And then there's continual improvement based off of that, but it's a fraction of a resource, and it's included with sort of the managed service offering. We touched on retention, high turnover. I think my friend from Paul Stockford from Saddle Tree Research is on. He probably has better data than I do on what turnover rate in the call center is these days. But bots don't quit, so you always have 100% retention, and they're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. QA in the live agent world, it's subjective. You've had somebody listening to calls. Is that a good call or bad call? With a bot, you can use speech analytics and text analytics to actually determine what that customer experience looks like and how that bot performed. And it's consistent. Doesn't have a bad day. You don't have to worry about it coming in a foul mood and, yelling at a customer. It's going to be consistent. It will do whatever you tell it to do. And then I think where all this comes together really is in that cost per interaction. We picked $5 as sort of an average. We've talked to some customers whose cost per call, is $7 to $8. When you can automate, call it even 30, 40% of someone's contact center volume, at about 10% of that expense, it's meaningful. So how has this played out then in the real world? So this case study in Kansas City, they came to us last spring because they were getting crushed in their call center with call volume spikes from around missed trash. They had a waste contractor that was underperforming. So it was causing high abandon rates, long queue times, and poor citizen experience. We built one simple bot for them, which was basically allowing a citizen to report their missed trash through our automated platform. They have a Cisco IPCC Express in there. It took their telecom guy 15 minutes to add another prompt in their IVR to send those calls to us. We collect the caller information just like an agent would, and then it's submitted for agent review. However, in March, they're actually upgrading their 3-in-1 platform, and they'll have an API. They're coming out of the 1990s and into 2020, and then that whole process will be automated. Now we're actually, because of the results I'm going to show you here, we're expanding that out into other call types. We reduced their cost per call by 90% in 5 months. 6 months saved them $24,000, which for a city the size, call center size of Kansas City is meaningful. Those are tax dollars that were saved. 416 hours of agent talk time, reduced the queue times. This was important to the city, is because when we cleared out those calls, it made room for everybody else, people that were calling for other reasons. So we've handled over 5,000 calls, and it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So where do you get started? Typical adoption process would be to pick a call type. But usually it's repetitive and simple in nature, or more of a Q&A, troubleshooting type of a call. That's not a hard and fast rule, but generally we don't want to start with like a complex, sales call or something that's touching multiple systems within one call. We can, but it's a different approach. And then I think it's important to establish early wins and then work up that complexity stack. And depending on sort of what back office applications you already have in place or what business systems you have in place, some of these use cases can be deployed within a matter of days. And then comes the onboarding and training. So, you integrate the thing, you construct the conversation, like how's this thing supposed to flow. If you have existing call recordings today or chat transcripts, we can import those, run our cognitive analysis on it, and spit out the text around, giving you the insight into, or giving us the insight as well. Why are people calling today? What's that experience like? And that can be used as the foundation to build a knowledge base and start training the bot. So I think I got it in 19 minutes, Vince.
That was outstanding. Thank you, Chris. That's a lot of information to absorb. If anyone has questions for Chris, please feel free to submit those, and I'll go ahead and ask them. We did have a question come in during the course of the presentation, Chris, okay. And it has to do with the ROI, and I don't know if this would be answered by the one you just presented, but what do you see as the minimum size required in terms of call volume and perhaps scope in order to achieve an ROI for a typical organization?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's two dimensions to it. One is volume of calls, and the other, axis would be sort of the complexity of calls. So if you've got a lot of simple calls, the ROI is quick and immediate and a pretty high return. If you have on the other side of that, if you have low volume, high complex calls, the upfront cost is going to be a little higher. So it's going to take longer, I think, to do that. But generally speaking, if you've got 100 calls a day for the same call type, that's a good starting point. Kansas City is, 50 calls a day, but it's a pretty simple call type. So I would say probably not less than 50, but generally 100 and up is a good place to start. Certainly the more the better, because you'll realize more economies of scale.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. And we did have another question come in. Basically, it's what are the differences between cognitive voice recognition and voice recognition?
Good question. So the way I would frame that is that speech recognition is an input. It's a component of the cognitive engine. So you still have to have the ability to take what a caller is saying and translate that into text, into a transcript that something knows what to do with. So like in our cognitive IVR, we use that as step one, and we can use customers' existing speech recognition software if needed, or we use some stuff in the cloud. But then where the cognitive component comes in, really then is in that natural language handling and intelligence in the call. So I don't think there's a traditional sort of speech recognition IVR out there that would say, be able to have, a full integration with like a knowledge base to let a customer say, my vacuum's not working, and it start to diagnose that in a fully conversational way. So the traditional speech recognition, again, has been more direct to dialogue, very simple transaction types.
Yeah, really powerful in terms of where we're going with capability. Unfortunately, most organizations don't have multiple seven figures to throw at it to create this truly complete natural language ability. So this gets there and gets there cost effectively.
Yeah, you know what? I was going to try to play a call, but I couldn't figure out how to do it through WebEx. Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do that as a follow-up. Yeah, we've got some call recordings, but I couldn't figure out how to do it on WebEx.
Okay. One more question came in, and that has to do with implementation timeline. From when a client has agreed upon a scope of work and come to terms with costs and all the things associated with a sale, how long does it then take to get the first call into the system?
Generally between 2 days and 2 weeks. So the sort of number one driving variable is just the complexity of the integration that we have to do. So again, if you've got like a Salesforce or like a Zendesk knowledge base or something, that those things can be turned on in a couple of days. But if we're integrating with some sort of custom, order, customer database or something, that can take a little longer. We're talking now we're going to implement one for a dental practice, and their back office system, will take a couple of weeks to get integrated within because it's not as modern. But generally, a couple of days, a couple of weeks.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. Well, Chris, I don't see any other questions coming in. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to share your lunch hour with us and share your perspectives. And thank you to all of the attendees in taking the time to participate in the call and hear what you have to say. If you have any questions or interest in learning more about how the cognitive voice recognition application would work for you, please feel free to reach out to anyone at the Vitech or MindSight teams, and we'll be happy to work with you and get Chris involved or someone from the exec team. So thank you. Take care.
Makes sense.
Michelle has left the meeting.